Hello, this is Chris Cooper, and a big welcome to the Business Elevation Show, where I'm here today with a fantastic guest. We've got Helen Avery. We're going to be talking about nature for everyone and why biodiversity, it really matters. It matters to communities, it matters to business, it matters to you, it matters to all of us. Before I do that, I'd like to say a big thank you to thank you firstly to, I think it was Libby Wagner, was it, who introduced us, Helen?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Yeah, to the fantastic Libby Wagner. Libby does amazing work in the United States, particularly around leadership, and she's an incredible force when it comes to writing and communication, and a real great inspirer of myself. So thank you to Libby for the kind introduction to Helen. I really enjoyed meeting Helen in London recently. I also want to say that a thank you to my guest last week. So Rhonda Curry joined us. Rhonda looks after the communication around services like cancer, healthcare, and she's just actually been promoted with a much wider remit. But she does that across Florida and some of the universities and institutions there, and has a large team, and they communicate across the globe about amazing initiatives and stories about good work and around the science and development around treatment that really helps people sort out their medical issues and improves their lives. And we talked about some of the kind of top tips as well about communicating globally, and some of the things that we can learn with our own communications when we're out there sharing and letting people know about good messages, information that can really be valuable to them. So thank you to Rhonda. So biodiversity loss.
Yes.
It's
Not the happiest topic, is
not,
it?
It's not, Helen, is it? No, it really isn't a happy topic. It has financial, social, and business consequences for us all. I'm delighted that I've been connecting today with Helen Avery. She's the Director of Nature Programs at the Green Finance Institute. She's been exploring how private sector investment is mobilised to restore nature and why this really matters to leaders, to organisations and communities. And I think it's really important to talk about biodiversity because, our world behind us, the biodiversity has been greatly impacted by, the behaviour of business, of organisations, of people on the planet. We know about that, and it has real consequences for us all. Helen leads a team that oversees the Green Finance Institute's work on supporting UK government investment readiness funds. She works with the UK's National Consultation Group with the Taskforce on nature-related financial disclosures. So I don't quite know necessarily what all of that means, but we're going to find out, no doubt. And she also works on international nature programs. She's got a real understanding of kind of finance and government and business and how to turn, ambitious goals into real-world action. We're going to talk here, a bit about the global agenda, why this is so important. Explore how we can make nature inclusive and relevant for everybody. It's not just about policymakers and investors and non-government organisations, but we can actually make change happen on the ground. And to have a think today about your relationship with nature, with biodiversity. Why is it important? And if you're a leader in a company, or in a community, or even just you're the leader of your family, and you've got kids and children. How do we look after this biodiversity? What's the impact that we can all play in making a real difference? So I'd like to say a big welcome to my guest today, to Helen Avery.
Thank you very much for having me, Chris. I'm excited to be here.
You're very welcome indeed. I wonder if you could maybe share a little bit about your journey, from your early career. And you've also did some amazing journalism work in New York. So we can talk a little bit about that. And, where did this fascination for nature and then eventually, the sustainability of it financially as well come from?
Yeah. I think like most people, hopefully most people, we love nature. So I think that's always been there at the back of my mind. Where we grew up we had a tiny garden, but my dad built a tiny pond, and he always got very excited about showing me the frogs, and we looked after tadpoles, things like that. So it's always, loved nature. We live by the sea. That's no different to many people's stories, I'm sure, whether you live by the sea or you live by a park or whatever. So I never really intended to work within the realm of nature. I studied languages at university and then ended up in a financial journalism job. It was just, what happened to land on at that time. Finance wasn't particularly interesting to me, I have to say, but I did love writing. And so I did enjoy sort of crafting news stories and breaking news around the financial markets. And then I ended up working for a trade publication, financial trade publication called Euromoney, and moved to New York in my mid to late 20s to cover US capital markets and investment banking on Wall Street, basically. And I moved there just in time for like that 2 year lead up to the global financial crisis and the crash. And I mean, I was never a big financial advocate or finance sector advocate anyway, even though I was a journalist working in that field, and really met so many incredible smart people. But that really, for me, tipped me into a bit of sort of questioning around why on earth would I be writing about an industry that is doing so much damage to our world. But also, I saw that there were a lot of people within banks who were using banking for good. And actually, if you think about banking, that's what it's designed for. It's designed to support local businesses and local communities, help people buy houses. And we'd somehow got off track of that. So I had a very supportive editor at the time and said to him, look, I'd really just like to write about sustainable finance. It was very early, 2010. We didn't really talk about climate finance, sustainable finance as a term, but he was very supportive. And so I wrote about social finance globally, and I wrote about nature finance. It was starting to emerge. We were thinking about how can you use financial instruments to support nature restoration or conservation or the transition to regenerative agriculture. And around that time, it was also tied in with climate. We sort of recognized that some of the things we can do for nature would support climate. So that's what I started covering. And then around 2019, I just felt like I actually wanted to stop writing and start doing, and had the fortune of being offered a job by the Green Finance Institute to move back to the UK and build out their nature team, sort of still using those skills of understanding how finance works, but actually putting into action with policy and communities and farmers.
Mm, excellent. So, would you say your love is more for nature than finance?
Yes, it is. It's for me, like I mean, I was always a bit embarrassed at telling people I worked in the arena of finance, which isn't fair. There's plenty of my friends who work in finance. I love it and are so
Mm,
proud of working in it. But for me, I was always a little bit like, how much good can it do? And but what I realized is it's such an amazing tool. Finance is just a tool, and how you direct that tool can have such big change. You direct it towards positive
yeah.
outcomes, you can get there. We can get to the planet we want. If you direct it towards more negative outcomes, we're going to end up with that. So it's really just a tool. But some really incredible people I've met over the years who's so passionate about the planet, who recognize that they can do more working in finance than maybe they could do in other sectors.
Yeah, and money actually is it's like it's energy, really, isn't it? And it
Yeah.
provides that energy, or that blood flowing through your system. It provides that blood that it can rejuvenate and re-energize something, and without it, it's
Yeah.
difficult to.
Yeah. And we live in a system, don't we? We live in a global economy, and everything is driven by money, whether we like it or not. It's a largely capitalist society that we live in. So if you do want to enact change, you do have to use the levers at your disposal. And one of the big ones is how do you move the economy? And that's through finance.
Yeah. So how would you, in simple terms, how would you define biodiversity and biodiversity loss to people? How would you sort of quantify that and help people understand where we're at currently?
Yeah. And so this is the depressing bit, isn't it? So, I mean, biodiversity, I think, to the man on the street, I mean, it's a bit of a strange word to use. I mean, it's just nature, isn't it? But nature, it tends to be all encompassing. So whether you use nature or you use biodiversity, I don't think it really matters. I don't, not to me. It will to an ecologist, but less so in sort of general terms. Um, and there was, I don't know if anyone here is familiar, there's something called the IPCC. It's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and that produced the report back in the 2010s that showed us just where we are on climate change. It really was a wake-up call, and then we had Al Gore backing a lot of that work at the time. And there was something similar, the same Intergovernmental Panel for Biodiversity, I'm just going to shorten the name to IPBES or IPBES, that produced in 2019 a really scary report about the state of our biodiversity and nature across the world. So it shows that like nature is declining at unprecedented rates in human history, with 1 million species at risk of extinction. More than a third of those are trees, actually. Just think how much we love trees and how we're at risk of losing them. And there are multiple factors for this biodiversity loss. I mean, we'll see it all around us. It probably feels, I can quote so many stats of where we are in terms of numbers of tigers. No more than 6,000 in the world at this moment in the wild. It's kind of crazy. Or, giraffes, or in the UK, we're losing oak trees at a massive rate, and ash because of ash dieback. And it goes on and on, which is losing so much biodiversity. But there are certain drivers that have moved us towards that. And I think they're really interesting. So if you don't mind, I'll sort of share them. And this is from this IPBES report. So you've got sort of direct drivers. It's really just sort of changing use of land. There's more of us. We're taking up more space. We're cutting down trees for agriculture, for example, or we're just building buildings, running roads through habitats and infrastructure. You've got sort of direct exploitation, which is sort of overfishing, overconsumption of resources. You've got climate change. So as climate's changing, it's changing habitats and how they can survive. You've got pollution, which I think, plastic is a huge one, but there's air pollution, water pollution, it goes on and on. And then invasive species, as we've had more global travel, obviously species that are supposed to live in certain areas come into other areas, and that can wipe out entire other species, and we're seeing that. But what I think is quite interesting was from this huge report that they talk about indirect impacts that are driving, indirect drivers of biodiversity loss, and that is people's disconnection from nature, and then also the lack of value and importance that we are putting on nature. And I think it's been a cultural shift for us as a human species over hundreds of years, where nature was almost like revered as a god, and it's become something that we are the god and nature is our servant type relationship. So I thought that was just super interesting that also, how do you change that and not just also reduce these direct drivers?
Yeah. And are you seeing any positivity in that area? Do you or
In
it's still
recovery.
like, yeah, I mean, and well, in terms, I'm thinking as well as people starting to respect nature a little bit more. I mean, indigenous populations tend to always have done, and they have a much better grounded insight and wisdom often about protecting species and land and not taking too much. But often in the modern societies, it's just been taken
Yeah.
and
So
mined and
yes,
used and
yeah, I mean, are we changing opinion? I think slowly. What you mentioned about indigenous cultures and peoples and local communities, they are very much part of this, what I would call a nature finance movement. And I use finance in the sense that we're also talking about businesses investing in nature and businesses reducing the impact. We're not just talking about banks lending. Like, this is sort of the flow of money. And there's, I'm sure we'll come on to the task force, TNFD as we call it, later, and that work there. But there's a real recognition of bringing in Indigenous peoples to actually help design solutions, to help set targets globally. We have the Global Biodiversity Framework, which again is not particularly well known, unlike sort of the Paris Agreement for climate was quite well known. We know what our target is on climate, but there was also the Global Biodiversity Framework, and we have targets by 2030 that nearly every government worldwide has signed up to, and those were designed with Indigenous peoples in the mix to sort of help understand how we can better support them and use that incredible knowledge that they have. So I think there's slowly a recognition, certainly through the economic sector, through business and finance. I think that is slowly changing, that we've sort of given nature a price of zero effectively, and now we're having to start to cost it in, and governments are realizing. So a lot of progress has been made, I'd say, in the last decade. But I'm not sure culturally if we are making that change. Like, when I look about and sort of see how people interact with our green spaces, I don't get the sense that we are revering them more.
yeah,
Do you
yeah.
know, maybe you see the worst of people when you're in public parks and things, but there is that. I'm not sure.
Because you live in the middle of a public park, don't
I
you?
do, I do. So I can't avoid watching the littering and various things that happen in public spaces. So maybe I'm a bit sensitive to that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you probably got first-hand experience of it. So tell us a little bit. You focus on unlocking private sector investment into solutions. What does that actually mean? And you're also involved with this UK government's investment funds and this task force. And what does all that really mean?
Yeah, it sounds quite vague, doesn't it? So, I mean, if I think about our vision within my team at the Green Finance Institute, it's how do you transition the entire economy to become one that actually values nature and invests in nature? Because as I said, at the moment, rarely will you find a firm that's investing in nature. And unless there's law enforcement or regulation, businesses aren't trying to reduce their negative impacts on nature either. So, how do we start to turn that around? What levers can we use? Is it policy? Can we use shareholder pressure on businesses to move? Can we use community pressure or voter pressure? So, we kind of look at everything. And we also bring businesses together to say, well, why aren't you investing in nature? What is it that's standing in the way? And whatever those they'll let you know what that is, and there'll be clear drivers that we can go away and think, okay, here are some of the solutions, and here's how we can drive them forward. So I think, yeah, I mean, I'd say that's sort of the majority of the work we're looking at is sort of working with businesses around the world and saying, how can we get you invested in nature-based solutions? How can we get you thinking about if you are using water, and that's like the whole of the manufacturing industry, for example, how can you use less water? Do you know that you're actually at risk of some of these water tables declining and therefore your business might go out of business? And that's something they haven't been thinking about, which is baffling to me. You think everyone would be looking at the natural resources and how they're depleting and how that's going to impact their business down the line. But actually, in a lot of cases, businesses don't know even where they're sourcing from. One supermarket in the UK, for example, we said, okay, well, where'd you get your tomatoes from? And they said, we've no idea. And I thought, gosh, how can you run a business and have no idea that, potentially you might be sourcing from the Mediterranean that's having a drought and you're not going to get any tomatoes this year? I mean, that's a huge impact to
Yes.
your business. So we're trying to sort of educate businesses, but also think through how do we work with their boards to get them investing? Because obviously it's a numbers game for a CFO. It's not going to be goodwill, is it?
No. No. Absolutely. So often targets are set, and you mentioned there about these international targets around biodiversity example. And how do you actually go from targets to seeing real change on the ground?
Yeah, I think this is what actually drove me out of journalism and into what I call the real world, which isn't particularly flattering to journalists. I love journalists have such an amazing role, but it was quite a shock to enter what I call the real world.
Yeah.
And was the fact that we had so many big announcements of I'm big firms, I'm committed to this, I'm committed to that, here's my target. And of course they get rolled back if there's a government change in policy or a change in CEO. And what you can set a target like we have for climate, if don't go above 1.5-degree increase. But how do you actually get there? And that's what I think is really interesting, because it's so many steps that have to happen all at the same time. So it's how do you ensure that businesses will take steps to reduce their risk? So coming back to nature, we talked about we mentioned the task force earlier, and that's the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. Real mouthful, sounds incredibly dry, doesn't it? The TNFD. But it is one of the most important things that's ever happened for nature, I think, with this sort of ambition of transitioning the economy. And it's been running about 5 years now, and we've had the privilege of supporting the setup of the TNFD globally. But effectively, that is a framework that's developed by the private sector with strong safeguards from ENGOs as well, that enables any business in the world, and these are the biggest businesses in the world that have signed up to it, to understand what are their nature risks, like where are they having an impact on nature, and where are they dependent on water or dependent on nature-based or habitats that reduce flood, for example, near their operations, or where are they operating where down the line they're probably going to get sued actually if they
Yeah.
continue operating, or there's going to be community pressure. And that framework helps them sort of identify those risks. So something like that is in the mix. But then you've got sort of other regulatory levers that governments can enforce that are things like uh, ensuring that any property development that takes place, this is an England regulation, but it's been very successful in the US for decades. Any property development that destroys a habitat has to recreate that habitat somewhere very nearby. So, sort of netting it off, if you will. There's this, and then for all of that, every business will say, okay, well, how do I do that? And then you think, okay, if you're going to do that, what impacts is that going to have on land management? What does this mean for farmers? What does it mean for cost of, because obviously you think, well, the more you have to invest as a business, you're going to pass those costs on to consumers, which is then going to cause cost of living impacts. So how do you get politicians on board with that and the consumer? And then ultimately, how do you get finances moving to support businesses in doing all of this? It's so complex.
Yeah.
And I think, you set targets, and governments often do this. They set targets, they sort of set the North Star, and then go, off you go. And then all of that has to get delivered in the interim. And that's the stuff that takes decades. And that's where people go, well, why isn't anything moving? It's because so much has to move. And it's very unglamorous. It's sitting in working groups going over and over. Where can we change the regulation? How are we going to change the regulation? What does that look like? And what are the impacts? It's mad. I've just, when you see it in action, it's just so interesting when you see a target now, because I think, wow, that one target is going to require hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people to make changes.
I sort of, from our government at the moment, you hear, hardly heard green issues mentioned in the last budget at all, barely mentioned, but the targets seem to be things like number of houses built. And if I
Mm.
look, I moved to this area and I live in rural Leicestershire, quite rural. It's not so now, but 20 years ago when I moved here, it was green fields and woods and seemed to be lots of wildlife, and it was lovely. And today, lots and lots of housing estates being built, not the appropriate amounts of infrastructure either, and gradually turning into an urban conurbation, with
Yeah.
everything linking to bar the areas which are flooding badly. But then, and ever heard in that time conversation saying actually what we need to do is to increase the number of species that are back in this area. Never heard those sorts of targets before.
No, and we have them. And it's interesting because when people hear species targets, people go, I don't care if there are more blackbirds. I would like more houses. And that seems sensible to someone who's struggling and we're lacking affordable housing. That seems like a sensible thing. Okay, well, we'll trade off. We'll get rid of the blackbirds because we want housing. But it's really the habitats. So, a meadow, for example, yes, it supports curlews and blackbirds and insects and grass snakes and squirrels and whatnots. And that's really important because each of those has an impact on another species. But that habitat is a water sink. So in a flood, there's a reason we have really struggle with flooding in this country now. It's because we've got rid of our green spaces, and
Yes.
everyone like paves over their front gardens because they need to park their cars somewhere because our roads are narrow, and
Mm.
all of a sudden that's an overload on a sewer that then results in a flood. But also they're cooling. Trees we know act as cooling agents. Our rivers, when they're properly running, are cooling so that they can support more fish. And the same with our oceans. The cooler they are, the more fish. Not, it's not a direct correlation, but the moment they're too warm, so they're not supporting our fish. So it is so relevant to us. But I think people go, nature, oh, you mean more squirrels or you mean more tigers. And it just feels like that. How does that affect me here? But it's the habitats that are impacting us all, impacting our economy.
Yeah. Yes. Well, definitely, and it's going to more and more flooding. We've seen it in our lifetime. We see it locally here. Moving to our house. It's partly on a hill, and I'm saying to my wife, "A good thing is we're never going to flood here." But we have a torrent several times a year now along the river at the bottom of our drive. It's really quite impressive. And the other thing I notice as being somebody in their 50s is I'm always amazed at the reduction in the number of birds since I was young. I remember
Yeah.
being flocks and flocks of house sparrows, for example. They were almost a nuisance, because they would be everywhere, and today they're almost like a rare species, which is
We've lost 30 million in terms of population of our house sparrows since the 1970s. I remember sparrows. I don't
Yeah.
see them at all in London. I know some people see them. I saw them a lot in New York. But I do not see them in London at all.
Yeah, it's sad. A few parakeets, but
Yeah, crows, lots of crows and magpies.
so how do you? Oh, well, we've only got 3 minutes now, so we're probably getting close to going to commercial break. But I suppose the question is, how do we really get boardrooms and communities on board with reframing nature in ways that they really do understand? You mentioned actually about companies there seeing actually you could end up without water if you're a company relying on that can be an issue. But
Yeah, I mean, it has to be a financial um, story. I think if you want it, well, we used to use the word nature with businesses. We don't now. We try and talk about resilience. So, just for example, because you talked about housing earlier, so delays in housing projects in the UK because there's not enough water at the moment costs 25 billion to the UK economy. It's wild. And soil degradation costs about 1.4 billion a year to the UK economy. So how do you take that number and then show what is that for an actual business? And it's much easier in the agri-food sector because they can see yields declining due to drought, due to flood, due to soil degradation, overuse of nutrients, for example. You can actually pinpoint how they're going to lose business over the coming decades so that you can then make a justification to their boards, to their CFO, to their credit teams that they should start to invest.
excellent. We're going to go to commercial break. After the commercial break, we'll be looking at more into this. We'll also share some and talk about some really inspiring stories of some really, some good news of some projects that have been happening around the world. It's not all negativity, and we'll start to move into thinking about what as well can we do as individuals, as communities, as business people, to really try and help this problem, because it isn't just about species. It is about the availability of things like water and the availability of soil to be able to grow our food in, and I suppose bees to pollinate plants and
Yeah.
crops, and it's fundamental. These species actually are an integral part of the system that enables us all to live on this planet. And without them, what's going to happen?
Mm.
We're back again with you in just a couple of minutes. Do join us after the break. Hi, this is Chris Cooper. I'm with Helen Avery, and we're talking about biodiversity, why it matters to businesses and communities, and we're kind of realizing that it's not just about species, which is very sad to see our species of nature, of wildlife diminishing, but actually the consequences of what this means to the entire system on things like flooding, on availability of food for us as well, and the importance as well. Businesses are at complete risk of issues if these things are not sorted out. I used to work for a company, and one of their factories was completely flooded and recently and out of action for about 6 months, something like that, due to flooding,
Yeah.
which was a huge consequence to them.
I was just thinking one thing haven't mentioned is that, I mean, we can see it in prices of goods. So, for example, I don't know if you noticed, but over 2022 to 24, olives were complete, like 95% of the global supply of olives is from the Mediterranean,
Yeah.
and they had such big droughts and disease, both nature-related risks. Couldn't cope with it, and so the price of olive oil and olives doubled over that period. We've seen sort of similar pressures on coffee, eggs, for example,
Yeah,
oranges.
yeah,
So we're
cocoa.
really, yeah, cocoa, yeah, absolutely. So we're really starting to see these impacts of how we've treated, a lot of it's industrial farming, actually, how we've treated our land and how we're, haven't looked after nature or helped nature regenerate. It's an argument we don't need to help it. It regenerates on its own if we just leave it alone. But yeah, it's very, very real, and something I don't think we talk about enough.
You actually shared a story with me when we spoke about this interview about salmon farming, I
Yeah.
think, in Scotland. Maybe you could share that.
Yeah, so I know it's quite difficult. If you love eating salmon, you might not want to again, but the majority of salmon is farmed. It's very little wild salmon left that you'll be purchasing from a store, and it's just riddled with disease. They're inhumanely treated salmon. It's a real. There's sort of been quite a lot of media exposure over the treatment of salmon. So again, we've overfished in our seas, and now we're replacing that because we can't give up salmon as human beings. We love to eat salmon with potentially, food that could cause us harm as well as sort of harming these poor creatures.
But I think you're also telling me. I think it was you who were telling me about the that they were taking krill from
Oh
different
gosh,
oceans.
yes.
That was the thing that really.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah. So essentially, to feed farmed salmon, you have to remove small fish and krill from places that we absolutely need them in the sea. So we're actually depleting krill in the oceans and around, I think it was the Arctic. I can't remember. It was a while ago that I remember hearing about this particular piece. Taking that out to feed farmed salmon, which is also causing all these problems in our oceans as well. Yeah.
So there's a growing concern about greenwashing. What does high? Tell us about what you mean by greenwashing, and what does high integrity nature investment look like?
Yeah. So I watched this when I was a journalist that there is a human tendency, isn't there, that if you see someone doing something good, like a business, you're quite suspicious that they really are doing something good.
Yeah.
And so there was a real focus on greenwashing. Like, are these businesses claiming that they're reducing their carbon footprints as much as they can and then offsetting with solid carbon credit projects? Are they, when they say that they are selling nature positive goods, are those really nature positive? And that's really valid to ask those questions. And there are standards that are being developed or have been developed, and there's certifications that are always adapting, always moving towards greater integrity as the science is coming through, that businesses can use to sort of justify what they're, putting out in their marketing materials often, or for their claims against reporting. But it has led to something called green hushing, which is that businesses now don't want to say when they're doing good things
Ah, I
because
see.
they will get ripped apart in the
Mm.
media if it turns out that it it didn't quite happen the way they wanted. So, for example, if you do purchase carbon credits from a plantation, there is a risk that, well, hopefully you've done everything right with that project developer. The community's been brought in, so you know it's going to be high integrity. You've reduced the risk of it failing. There should be a buffer in case there's any risk. But those trees could be wiped out in a wildfire. You could have some human beings go in there and set fire to a whole bunch of stuff because, they had a barbecue late at night in the heat of summer or something. And also through climate change, some of those species of trees may fail. And so we have to give our businesses, I think, a little bit more leeway to fail, because what's happening with this green hushing is that, you know, businesses are followers. They don't like to put their neck out on the line. They don't want to find themselves on the front page of the Guardian of, that they did something terrible. And the media, having been within the media, we don't always try and have a balanced view because it's more sensational. Now we're all driven by clicks and opinion pieces rather than we used to be driven by facts as a media. It can really do some damage. And we've seen that in carbon credit markets. We've seen carbon credits, which is such a great way of channeling finance into tree planting, have completely fallen off because people are so scared of the bad reputation. So it's on both sides. There's greenwashing. We absolutely don't want our businesses to do that. And there are sort of ways to mitigate that risk. But there's also this green hushing on the other side.
That's really interesting. Really interesting. And it's fascinating in respect that one of the reasons for this is I think the media sometimes are looking for angles, aren't they? But there's also on one side there's organisations who maybe profiteered from the environment. I think of some of the utilities companies and pushing sewage through systems, but also partly because the system itself is inadequate that sits behind it. So government pushes pressure one area and in one area and so there's all that going on, and creating organisations that created damage, but they leave others to clear it.
You might donate money to a charity that saves, I don't know, I'm not going to make this up, saves the whales, and then go on a lot of exotic holidays on a planes where the carbon footprint's killing the whales.
Yeah.
It's we're all guilty of it. I think for businesses, you can see if it's what I would call it corporate social responsibility funds going out the door to purchase credits or pay for restoration, that's a marketing budget. What you really want is them to say, actually, let's review where we're sourcing our own products. Are we supporting nature regeneration in those areas? Is there sort of changes in our suppliers that we should be looking at? Are we supporting our communities around our operations by using nature-based solutions? That tells you that company is I'm trying to think of a polite way, cares about nature rather than just writing a check. I'm not saying that's a bad thing because we all want checks going to nature as well, but that's sort of how you can start to sort of really see who's committed. It's sort of the actions rather than the donation checks. And that's for all of us, isn't it?
I mean, so what does a carbon credit really mean?
It represents a carbon sequestered. So if I have just talking personally, if I fly to the States to visit my mother-in-law, I'm incurring a carbon footprint, CO2 emissions. And so if I have to go and see my mother-in-law, she's my mother-in-law, I can't get around that. I could maybe take a yacht and just sail there, but I haven't got time. So I just want to offset it. So what I would do is I'd purchase a carbon credit that represents every ton of carbon that I had to emit for me to get to the States. I purchased that and it's sequestered into the soil and through a tree, into a tree that's planted. So it's a way of creating a sort of mechanism that can basically net out your carbon footprint. But trees are the best. They're the best way of us sequestering carbon, and also things like salt marsh and hedgerows. Soil actually is a great sequester of carbon.
So a lot of money going into carbon credits. So are we seeing big net increases in our trees?
In the number of trees that we have? Well, one would hope, wouldn't we? But I do think, it's great as science where we are in science, I do think there's so much more to learn. And again, comes back to this, like we have to allow ourselves to fail. So you'll probably see around most countries, and certainly the UK, lots of tr those plastic tree
Yeah,
guards,
yeah,
where it's
yeah.
just been like hundreds of millions of trees planted. And then we actually get down to it, people plant them with those plastic tree guards, and trees can't grow in those plastic tree guards. So you just see lots of plastic tree guards
Yeah.
and no trees. And that's a fairly recent recognition that we have to, one, use biodegradable tree guards, but two, take them off
Yes.
after a year. So are we planting more trees? Yes, but we're nowhere near the targets that we need for tree planting at all, not in the UK.
It's tree. Really, we need tree planting and tree nurturing rather than. Oh, there we go. I planted a tree.
Yeah, yeah, done now.
That's done now. That's
Yeah.
been done. Are you seeing any examples where you're really encouraged?
Yes, I know it probably sounds quite negative about, biodiversity loss and what's it. There are so many positive stories. I mean, so the TNFD that I mentioned, I think it's something like 800 businesses globally with over sort of $20 trillion of assets have signed up to not just signed up to they're doing the framework to understand their impacts and dependencies. That's really big. In 5 years, that's a very big change. In the UK, I think we're close to 100 businesses now are moving through that framework. We work with businesses in GFI that are really thinking about how they can transition now towards more. We hate to use the word nature positive because what does that mean? But I'm just going to use it towards more nature positive activities. So there is a massive movement. But some of the projects that are really close to my heart, there are sort of a bit more community based, rather than thinking about technologies that can reduce impact, tend to be with working with farmers. So you'll see some of the water utilities in this country, and I know in many countries, including the Netherlands, for example, and Denmark, the nutrient our rivers are polluted. There's not one river in England that's of good quality. It's so bad.
National disgrace.
Absolutely. And that's for multiple reasons. Some of it is nutrient runoff of farmland
Yeah.
into the water. Some of it's slurry, so cow manure off into the water. Some of it's just pollution that's been, overflowing from combined sewers from the Victorian age era. Some of it's just lack of investment in piping from water utilities, and industrial pollution, but also our own chemical pollution. Every time you build a house, think of the amount of phosphate load that's going to go into our waterways because here I am using all these chemicals in my home. So there's so many reasons behind the problem of pollution. I've completely forgotten where we're going. Oh, yeah, and projects. So some water companies will pay farmers to reduce those nitrates or to not farm as close to a river's edge. And it saves millions and millions for a water company because they're no longer having to treat with chemicals. They're actually just stopping some of the flow from the farmers. And it's also really giving farmers an alternative income, especially as
Mm.
subsidies are under pressure. So that there's plenty of examples of that. But the couple I love, if I've got time, this one
Mm.
in Scotland, which I know I mentioned to you before. So Trees for Life, it's incredible in the Highlands of Scotland, seeking to plant millions and millions of trees and bring back the Caledonian rainforests of Scotland that were used to be there until it got overgrazed and there are lots of deer running around, killing, eating everything, and getting farmed. So Trees for Life is planting millions of trees, but they are really working with the community as well. So bringing them in, understanding how you can use the community to plant trees, create jobs. Also, how do you create affordable housing in those areas, and how do you raise the funding for it? So one is they've been selling carbon credits, a third of which goes back to the community into community projects for nature restoration. And there's a rewilding centre that they funded through a like crowd funded bond with a return of 6%. It sold out within, I think it was 24 hours. It's a 2 million bond that you could buy through your bank. In this case, it was Triodos Bank, to build this rewilding centre that can create a revenue stream for them to keep going. So people who visit the rewilding centre pay, they can pay to stay the night, they can do tours. And the whole rewilding centre is in Gaelic. So you go in, it's in English, or you read it in Scottish Gaelic, and it's about sort of stories of the land. It's so integrated in nature and the community, and you just rarely see that. I think it's quite
Mm.
a special place, and I would really recommend going up to visit it in Dundregan, just outside of Inverness near Loch Ness. If you're going that way, it's wonderful. And then the other one, just really quickly, is so in the African Wildlife Foundation, just an incredible organization in Rwanda, really suffering with poaching of gorillas, mountain gorillas. It's a very special area, Uganda, Rwanda, for those gorillas. And there was a eco lodge there that was run by a Western company, and some of that money would be used for the local people. And the foundation worked with several other organizations to buy that lodge back, have it run by the community that lives there. And the money that is made from that lodge pays for hospitals, for schools, the people who live there work there. And what that's meant is that that community is so invested in the tourism that's coming through that there is no poaching anymore. So the number of mountain gorillas has so expanded that they're having to find more land for those gorillas to
Right.
move into now. So it's just such a good story, I think, of when you really just just work with community on nature restoration, that it's really, really, really powerful. You can have such a big impact that actually also becomes a commercial and economic success.
Yeah, yeah, and that sounds an amazing story. And only a couple of weeks ago, we had Dr. Laurie Layden on, who spent the show, who spent 10 years working in Rwanda with genocide victims, and we were, hearing a little bit about the dealing with the trauma that all of that's caused. I can imagine something like that can help build bridges between communities as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Country with a difficult past,
yeah.
like recent past as well. So you're I know that you're going to take a little bit of break from a career break at the moment, and give yourself a little bit of time and space to think. What do you envisage the next year or so is going to, or however long that time may be, is going to mean for you as you consider now and reflect upon the next stage in your evolution?
Yeah, yeah. Yes, it's been an amazing 5.5 years at GFI. I just what what I'm finding is that it's these areas, and I watch it throughout our industry, and it's I'm sure it's everywhere at the moment. You devote so much energy to it and work so many hours of your week that at some point you can get a little bit frustrated by the pace of change. And I think the last thing you want to do is come to such an important topic, whether you're working in health or education, in this case the environment, and feel a bit, you know, what next? I just don't, a bit hopeless, a bit burnt out, if you will. And I see it across industries. So I thought, do you know what? I'm noticing that I'm the person on a panel or on the stage at events who's saying things like, "Oh, this is frustrating," or "Oh, why aren't we doing more?" And I thought, you know what? We need such energy for
Yeah.
these missions that it's a good time to just maybe step back, re-energize, and then think, how can I best use my expertise to come back into this field? Um, maybe maybe revisiting writing, or maybe just coming back and doing exactly what I'm doing now. But I did sense that it's time for a little bit of break and a reflection, and just time to read. I mean, who has time to read these days?
Mm.
There's just so much work, and just the thought of being able to read all these wonderful reports that come out and actually absorb them and think through some solutions. It's just, yeah, can't wait.
That's good. We're all
It won't
kind
be
of
long. So,
no. Well, we're all actually, as individuals, we're a biodiverse system, aren't we?
yeah,
And actually sometimes needs some time out to reflect and rebuild and strengthen and re-energize and think about purpose again,
yeah, yeah.
just reconnecting again. So thank you for sharing that. And if you have any business leaders listening to this interview,
Hmm.
and we've actually only got probably about 4 or 5 minutes left at the most now, to the end of the interview. And what practical what would you suggest?
Yeah, well, I would definitely look at the TNFD framework and just start thinking about actually what are your impacts on nature, either as an operation, just like the shop you run or the store you run or the factory or whatever it's going to be, or the whole operation, as well as where you're sourcing from, and just really start to get to grips with that. I think that's the first thing you can do. And that really would be, because then that becomes quite illuminating for yourself about, are you thinking about those future risks to your business? And what is your role in biodiversity loss? So that would be just, there's so much free advice on the TNFD website and on our own website, actually, on how to get started.
And this is not only an issue for kind of, you mentioned, those organisations with turning over 20 trillion between them, those 800 organisations. It's also, something for individuals and for communities. We can all play, what a part. It doesn't matter what our economic means are.
Hmm.
What would you recommend to people to, themselves, to better look after nature and kind of reconnect with it?
Yeah, I think I know you and I've talked about this before. Look, conservation, nature isn't the realm of ENGOs. It's the realm of all of us. So we all can do something. So we don't have to just pay £10 to RSPB, as lovely as that is, or whatever your nature charity is in your country. Um, I think it starts with just being curious. We're all so busy. We've all got so many pressures on ourselves, like putting food on the table for our families. But if we can get curious about the trees on our street, what are they? How are they doing? There are a lot of, in urban areas in particular, covered, buried rivers. So, what are the rivers that are actually maybe flowing down your street, under your street? There's lots of maps on those. And actually, some cities are starting to daylight those rivers, which is incredible. But get curious about that. Or what is the state of your river? You can look up online. What's the state of my local river in terms of pollution? What's causing that? But the biggest one of all is write to your local councillor, your MP, whoever your government official is, and ask them, what are you doing about green spaces in my area? Because I think the moment our politicians are thinking we don't care about nature,
Yeah.
and I think we do, but we think someone else is doing it or it's not for us, or what thing can I do? But I do think we need to get on to our government and let them know it is a voting issue.
Yes. Got a great point there. So you got a final message you'd like to leave us with?
I don't think so. I think it's just, as I say, it's we love nature. We are nature. Get out, enjoy it, and see what you can do. I think you'll be inspired. It's you get out in nature, you're inspired.
Yeah.
So it's sort of it's a win-win. You'll go out in nature, get inspired on what to do to help nature. So I think that's where I'd start. That's what I plan to do with my next 5 months.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. I think that was a brilliant conversation, and I think just getting to understand those, how what is happening out there, that the role that all of us have, whether we're business leaders, potentially in our communities, writing to our MPs. But this is really, really important. It's important for the future generations. In my lifetime and your lifetime, Helen, we've seen massive changes in our biodiversity, and it's the risk it's only going to go one way unless we all take it really, really seriously
Do you-
at every level.
yeah, I mean, if I've got time, just leave you one line. This was out.
Yeah.
So the National Security Assessment came out in January for the UK, and about biodiversity, and it says every critical ecosystem is on a pathway to collapse, and that is high confidence, and that's from our own government. So this is, it's happening.
Well, we want to find out what they're doing about it.
Mm.
So thank you very much indeed. It's an absolutely brilliant, helpful, inspiring, but also concerning conversation as well. It's really, really important for us all. So if you want to find out a little bit more about the Green Finance Institute, you can go to the greenfinanceinstitute.com. You can also, I'm sure, check out Helen Avery, that's Avery, on LinkedIn. If you listen to this and you want to connect with Helen, do let her know where that came from. I can tend to get lots of invitation requests with no explanation why somebody wants to connect with me. I always like it when I know. That's when I'll consider them and accept them. So I want to hear from you. If you've got any questions or comments, come back at chris@chriscooper.co.uk. Always love to hear from you. Next week I have Simon Greer. Simon is the founder of Bridging the Gap, an absolute expert when it comes to bridging the gap between communities. He's done lots of work in places like Israel and with Palestine, and done some incredible work. So we'll talk to Simon next week. But once again, a big thank you to Helen Avery, and please go away, have a think of this week about the nature. Maybe it's around your home, in the local community. Have a think about how maybe you could get involved and help us to stop this collapse that Helen has talked about. Thank you.